When John Young first learns that NASA will build a shuttle, it's years before its first launch, and he's a long way from home. John Young learned by radio that the Senate, in April 1972, had voted 277 to 60 for the space budget that includes the vote for the shuttle. He was then walking with Charlie Duke in the Descartes Mountains on the moon. John Young was chief of the astronaut office in 1979. He walked on the moon in Apollo 16, flew around the moon in Apollo 10, and was a Gemini veteran. He was the obvious choice to be commander of the first flight. So the first commander of the space shuttle first learned NASA would build it while he was walking on the moon. And the then director of flight crew operations, Deke Slayton, came to rookie astronaut Bob Crippen one day and said, "Cripp, how would you like to fly the first one?" Cripp said he was doing handsprings at that point in time. Every other NASA project has flown unmanned missions first, where we launch the capsule on automatic pilot to prove the system before we come to launching the first people inside it. Because if you're going to launch it and the rocket explodes on the way up, or it burns up in the atmosphere, or if the thrusters don't work in space, you don't want people inside it to get killed. So every other NASA project flown unmanned test flights first. Not this time. Columbia, for her first mission, will need to be piloted back down to a runway landing. And each shuttle costs $2 billion, and they don't particularly want to lose this thing. So for the first high-risk mission, John Young and Bob Crippen will be at the controls. The shuttle is designed for a crew of 7. For the first high-risk mission, NASA is sending only 2. Mission designation is STS-1. Launch of STS-1 was scheduled for mid-1979 to go up and test fly the shuttle, and then the next mission would go up and save the Skylab space station to put it into a higher orbit in order to increase its longevity to allow us to use it again with the shuttle program. Well, the guys at Downey were working as fast as they could, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to get Columbia ready to fly, to ship down to the Cape for the first flight. They were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it wasn't enough. We missed our deadline of 1979, and in that year Skylab's orbit decayed and she burned up in the atmosphere over Australia. And it's not until 1981 that Columbia is finally ready to launch. And so on April 12th, 1981, 20 years to the day that Yuri Gagarin took off on his first flight, they got Bob Crippen and John Young up bright and early in the morning. They had a nice breakfast of coffee, toast, eggs, bacon. They take you out this little corridor they have in the operations of checkout building to get your spacesuit on. And they take you out to this little bus that we have with some press out there, and then they take you out to the launch pad. The same crawler that took the giant Saturn V launch vehicles for the moon missions takes the shuttle to the same launch pad. And at 1 mile an hour, it takes the crawler 6 hours to get out to the launch pad from the massive vehicle assembly building, the building with the largest doors in the world. And as the crawler takes it out to the pad and we see the shuttle, it's beautiful, but not in a streamlined sort of way. To Bob Crippen, he said it's just all kinds of muscle because it's got all these engines and solid rockets. It just looks powerful, incredibly powerful. And for this first mission, the shuttle looked a bit different as you would probably recognise it today. The external fuel tank, which is famously this bright orange thing, we painted it white, just for decoration, to make it look better, instead of having a big powerful space thing with a bright orange tank. But we stopped doing that after a few flights and had it back to its now famous orange colour. So the bright white and black Columbia rolled out to the pad a couple of days earlier, and then John Young and Bob Crippen climbed up onto the launch platform and into their spaceship. For the first time in 6 years, NASA starts a countdown to launch astronauts into space. And Bob Crippen said he got up and he said it's a very complicated vehicle, and he really thought that they would do lots of countdowns before we actually got around to launching that day. And it wasn't until the count got inside of a minute that Bob Crippen's heart rate went up to about 130. John's was a nice calm 90. A really cool guy is John Young. Just he said that we didn't have any idea about probability or risk assessment when the shuttle was first launched. Anybody who thinks they can statistically predict when something with 2 million moving parts is going to fail is sort of smoking something they shouldn't be, probably. The main engines start and it really feels alive. That's the preliminary signal that something really great is about to happen. We fire jets of water down to protect the concrete pad from the shock waves as it comes out, and then sparks fly and we release a tiny bit of fuel. The sparks ignite the fuel and the three main engines spark into life at about 6 seconds before launch. Then at T-minus 1 second, as the whole vehicle is moving, as these three main engines are online, then the solid rocket boosters ignite. Once the SRBs ignite, they cannot be shut off. The shuttle is committed to flight. That is our point of no return. And with these solid rocket boosters, there was no way to shut them down, no way to throttle them. So if you had a problem with those, you rode it out until you could separate from the solid rocket boosters and abort. And you feel this kick in your back, and it feels like the vehicle has jumped off the pad, and the whole thing starts vibrating and shaking. It feels angry, it feels fierce, it feels ferocious as it comes off this pad. And sitting in the front window, you can see the tower going by. And by the time you clear above the tower, you're going already over 100 miles an hour. It's a pretty exciting time. We roll the spacecraft around as it accelerates upwards so that we can get it aligned for a correct easterly course to go in an equatorial orbit. And as the shuttle goes up, we throttle the engines down to 73% of max rated thrust to protect the tiles as we go supersonic, what we call max Q, in the region of maximum aerodynamic pressure. We throttle these engines down as we go supersonic, and then at about 800 or 900 miles an hour, we throttle these things back up to 104% of max rated thrust and propel us up into space. 2 minutes and 20 seconds after ignition, the solid rocket boosters burn out and we separate them from the stack, and those things plane away. And for another 6 minutes, the three main engines take us up into orbit. And John Young said that once we got up there without anything blowing up or catching fire, he reckoned we were home and safe. John Young and Bob Crippen fly Columbia through space for 2 days. They orbit the Earth 36 times. they got a call from the Vice President of the United States, George Bush, congratulating them on getting into orbit, and he said, "How's Crip's heart rate doing?" John said, "Well, I think we're about down to nothing now." We want to open up the big shuttle bay doors because the electronics generate a lot of heat, and we want to get these doors open, and also just to test them to make sure that we can open them in space to this big cargo bay. And in the back of the cockpit we have these windows. Looking out the window. Shuttle's got great windows for looking out, and we have two set right at the back of the cockpit for looking into the cargo bay for one of the crew members to use this robotic manipulator arm that we had developed for using on our payloads. And what John Young and Bob Crippen see when they look out those windows disturbs them, because our OMS engines at the back have little bulges that come out, and you can see them at the side of the tail, and they're missing some tiles. If we lose too many tiles in the wrong place, they're not going to come home and talk about it. So again, this being the first flight, there wasn't a whole lot that we could do. We have to bring these guys home whether they've lost tiles or not. About 16 tiles they reckon they lost. And STS-1 is not widely regarded, is the most dangerous mission, the riskiest mission that NASA ever even attempted. Re-entry will test the thermal tiles when the shuttle hits the atmosphere at 14,000 miles an hour. And they were in the dark at the time. And one of the dramatic things that Bob Crippen did notice was suddenly the outside, which was supposed to be dark, started glowing this soft pink. And he said that it was obvious that those little molecules outside were getting very warm. And then slowly it went from pink to then orange to then red to then yellow and then white. And as they were coming down through the air, you actually, with these forward-facing windows, start to get a sense of speed. You cannot believe the speed out the window. It's fantastically fast. And Bob Crippen said to John Young, he looked around and said, "What a way to come into California." We knew that they were coming in over the west coast of Santa Barbara to turn into a runway landing at runway 23 of Edwards Air Force Base. And John brings around, greases it in, about the smoothest landing you could possibly imagine. As they're coming in, they both look out either side of the runway, and Bob Crippen said, "Hey, look at all the people out there." And there were thousands, tens of thousands of people all lining this runway strip to welcome their heroes home. And it was absolutely fantastic when we landed Columbia to see John Young come out and do his Young dance. This is the Young dance. So we brought it home, and the shuttle era begins.